Well, Lars, should we start with PSG? We've learned one thing from the Club World Cup final, and that is that they are not invincible. However, are they still Europe's best team?
I would think so. I hate to be pedantic and pull you up on your wording on anything, Dotun. I would never do that. But I just listened to the intro there, and the question is, how can they get back on track to world domination? I think they are dominating the world. I think this is what world domination looks like. I think they did lose one game at the end of what must have been a very tiring tournament for them. And we can get into the specifics of the game later, but I honestly think the manner of which they reached that final, beating Real Madrid and Bayern as comprehensively as they did, even if they did lose the final to Chelsea, I come out of that tournament even stronger in my belief that PSG are the best team in the world right now. I think this is still true, even if Chelsea beat them in the final. So I don't think this is a case of ripping up everything and going again. I think it was perhaps a useful lesson. You could term it as if you're trying to find, if you're PSG and you're looking for positives here. Not a bad idea for that very young group of players to be reminded that occasionally you lose football games and occasionally there are consequences to this. I don't think they're any further away from world domination now than they were a week ago.
Yeah, Andy, it's interesting how Lars described it as this is what world domination looks like in football. It sounds a little bit like Elon Musk, when he was celebrating the victory of Donald Trump, saying, this is what victory looks like, It is losing the final of a major tournament, despite however you've got there. Can that ever be world domination? Surely that's a huge blip, isn't it?
I suppose it all depends, Dotun, on how much meaning you attribute to the Club World Cup. It's clear they would have liked to win it. It's clear that they did everything they could to win it. But are we sitting here, in all honesty, and saying it's as important as the Champions League or the treble or anything that went before? Because I don't think we're doing that, are we? It would have been... It would have been handy. It would have been welcome. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But it is quite difficult to know how much meaning beyond the commercial. And commercially, by the way, it was a massive success for the club. And I know we should be talking about the sports side of it, but increasingly we can't avoid talking about the business side of it. That part of it went really, really well for them, both in Los Angeles and New York. The fact they spent consistent time in both of those places and they felt really managed to connect with people. And that is a big deal, because if you look at the crowds, and particularly the crowd of that semi-final, which was so weighted in favour of Real Madrid in the semi, I think that's a reminder. When we're talking about world domination, there are two layers of world domination, aren't there? There's the sports side of it, and there's the commercial, our brand side of it. I think it's easy to convince yourself that even, let's just park the sport bit for a minute. It's easy to convince yourself that PSG have cracked it all with world domination, because if you go and walk up the street now and you pass 10 people, I bet you at least 2 of them are wearing some sort of Jordan PSG top. And that really is remarkable, how PSG have got themselves in that sort of position, sort of aligning themselves with, say, a Barcelona or a Real Madrid. But this Club World Cup, as well as a reminder that they're not invincible on the pitch, is a good reminder that they're nowhere near where they want to be off it, that they've made good strides, but they're not quite there yet. And this actually does, I think, feed back into the sports side of it. The fact that Luis Enrique said throughout the last season, this is a young team, a team that's still learning. And he kind of embraced the mistakes, really. The fact that he talked about that throughout the season. Like, he looked so pleased, actually, after they really diced with danger in the quarter-final of the Champions League against Aston Villa, because he said, well, it's a great growth experience. We didn't just get through. I feel delighted that we got through and that we learned something along the way. But I guess this is a reminder, and when we're talking about them going on to dominate the Champions League, which is far more important than winning the Club World Cup final, if they'd have won the Club World Cup final and then not won the Champions League the next 3 years, then we're talking about a failure. But as Lars was saying, if the Club World Cup is, and the lessons learnt from that on the pitch, are a way to make sure they repeat in the Champions League, then it turns out to be a big success, doesn't it?
Of course, I'm hearing a lot of slander here against the Club World Cup because I have been listening to Gianni Infantino, who has been very clear that this is now the most significant club tournament in the world. So any of you who thinks, if you think the Champions League is bigger than this, then you are just wrong, sir. Just wrong, because our Lord and Savior Gianni has explained this to us. Now, I was thinking about, it was a big, you've talked about this at length, Andy, and about how this summer was seen as a marketing opportunity for these teams as part of this ongoing attempt to break America, to grow their brand over there. And it just occurred to me watching the semi-final against Real Madrid, where so many of the people were there to watch Real Madrid, and instead they got a good going over by PSG. I think if you're a young American kid who kind of likes football, and you were watching that game, if you didn't have any allegiance previously, I think you came out of that game being at least a little bit PSG curious, you know? I mean, I think that's the kind of it felt like a genuine big time occasion. It wasn't just a preseason friendly. It wasn't just an exhibition game. It was a game that felt like it had stakes. And PSG washed the floor with Real Madrid, who seemed to be the most popular team in the tournament. That's kind of a powerful statement in terms of how that. I think that's something that will genuinely move the needle a little bit in terms of their popularity over in the US, and it will have helped them be successful this tournament in that sense.
Yeah, I totally agree with you in the sense that when you saw that sea of whites in the semi-final against Real Madrid, the one notes of interest is that the ultras, PSG ultras, were in the middle of that having a great time, probably having the greatest time of any supporters, once the South Americans had left. And there is one sense, Andy, which I think we can, embrace this idea that Lars has introduced of this is what world domination looks like. World domination looks like, yes, because you have to, if you're dominating the world, you keep playing and playing and playing, as Spain did in the 3 tournaments that they were unbeaten. You have to play to your absolutely top level on each occasion, like a tennis player, and it also suggests that you may and probably have played at least one more game than your opponents in a very, very long season. Can we put down this blip, if that is the case, to a long season, mate? Just one game too many, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think consistency is the holy grail that every football team is going to be lurching for in this current state of football as it is. And I don't think we can overlook the fact that, especially as they're involved in the playoff round in the Champions League, the punishment round, as Danny Kelly calls it, they've played every game it's possible to play in the last season, which is an incredible thing, really. So, I think to top that up, it is an awful lot. And when you get to the United States, as they did, off the back of the emotional high of the treble and of that performance in the Champions League final, the definitive performance in the Champions League final, I think for them to pick themselves up again and get as far as they did was pretty remarkable, because they arrived there with a not entirely fit Bradley Barcola, an injured Ousmane Dembele, who can only really get involved in the back end of the competition, like his mate Kylian Mbappe. And by the time you get to the final, they've got half the bench that Chelsea do, and they've got their best defender, William Pacho, suspended, as well as Luke Hernandez, of course. So I think those things, compared with Chelsea's approach, and Chelsea's approach was smart, by the way. It was really, really intelligent, and we've seen English teams in general, actually, we've seen it with Villa in patches and Arsenal in patches, be able to put them under a pressure that they need to be able to think their way around. And I think it's sort of underlined, in my mind, Lars, the limits of Vitinha as a defensive midfielder. And especially when you look at how, like, Nuno Mendes has got a lot of stick for that, and Kvaratskhelia has got a lot of stick for that, the way that Cole Palmer was able to run the show in the first half. I think, personally, Vitinha he was one of the candidates for the Ballon d'Or, certainly, and I don't think that's unreasonable. He's an unbelievable player. is a much better defensive midfielder when you've got the ball than when you haven't. Now, most of the time they've got the ball, but when they're being pressed, I think it's something totally different. And Palmer said it himself, didn't he? He said Maresca told him he would have space and he would find space. And he was absolutely right. So I think it's always this thing, and we saw it from the very first game. And when I was out there, actually, we saw the fact that the way that PSG do that thing of slugging the ball into the far corner out of play so they can press from the off. We saw that against Atletico Madrid in the first game. And we saw Atletico Madrid running to take the throw in really quickly so they couldn't get pressed. And so it's clear that they are already, like, if you like, a legendary enough team for them to be studied in depth and all their little habits to be studied in depth. And Luis Enrique will not be unaware of this. And to have a couple of weeks off to have a think about that and thinking, A, how can we evolve? And B, what are the extra players that we need to continue to evolve? I think is important.
Yeah, there's a couple of points. One is the point that Dotun makes about how the nature of being the dominant team is that you play a heck of a lot of games because you're always going deep in tournaments. So this is, I think, because they're playing that. And one of the reasons they've become, I'm like spiritually and philosophically opposed to PSG as an entity, but I can't deny that it's been fun watching their team this year because they play at they're a high pressing team. They're good in possession, but they also play with a good tempo. You know, they're not super patient with the ball. They want to get moving. They want to get forward. That's a very high intensity way of playing physically. Like, it takes a lot both to be that sharp off the ball, but also try to be incisive with it. Most teams that press high like to rest with the ball quite a lot, and I think PSG are pleasingly aggressive with the ball, and it makes them a great watch. But it also costs a lot physically from the players. And if you're going to go to the final of the French Cup and the French League Cup every season, and you have a full league season, and you're likely going to be in the semi or the final of the Champions League every season, there's going to be some tired guys out there when you get to a summer tournament like the Club World Cup. I mean, and I don't think this means Luis Enrique has to go back and rethink what he does, but maybe there needs to be a tiny bit more rotation to save some guys if this is how they're going to play.
Yeah.
Because he is quite wedded to his strongest 11. And the other thing I want to flag up is because this is something Andy has said. We've had this discussion on the pod, I think, because I started looking at that midfield of Vitinha and Neves and Fabian Ruiz, possibly Zaire Emery in the future, and thinking, wow, this could grow into becoming the best midfield in Europe. And in the last 6 months, that has looked to be the case. But you've always held back a little bit, Andy, because you felt they needed a bruiser in there to be truly complete.
I think it needs to be an option. I don't think it needs to be an option every game, but I think ever since Luis Enrique decided he didn't want Manuel Ugarte, and I get why he doesn't want him. He's basically not good enough on the ball for the sort of team that he wants to have. That doesn't mean they shouldn't have that sort of player. They should just have that sort of player who is better on the ball, I think. And to expect Vitinha to go through like 70-odd games where he's got to play, like, I think, adapt to different needs against different opponents, it's just a bit much. And I think you're absolutely right about him being a bit wedded to his favourite 11. They need to find a way around that. And when I was saying to David and I were speaking, Dotun, last week about how, like, I reckon that PSG needs to go and sign 4 players this summer. I think they need a goalkeeper, at least one central defender, regardless of what happens with Donnarumma. Of course, he's only got a year left on his contract, and we'll see what happens there. But they need a top-quality goalkeeper who's good with his feet to at least provide some sort of competition or alternative. They need another centre-back because Kimpembe at this point they're probably not bringing back. Luca Hernandez has got a patchy injury record, and Marquinhos will probably leave after next year. They need that other defensive midfielder in my mind, and they need a centre forward too, because I think when we talk about them not rotating, I think the question has got to be, like, how much does Luis Enrique believe in the players that aren't in the 11? It's not just that he loves the 11 so much, it's clearly that he believes there's a drop-off to guys 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. which is an issue. And like even when we're talking about Donnarumma, say he signs a new contract, is Safanov really good enough to play the games instead of him? I mean, from what I've seen, he's not way better with his feet, if at all, and he's clearly not the equal of him as a goalkeeper, because few are in terms of shot stopper with Donnarumma. So you've got questions there. They've got a lot of business to do, and this is where actually, even for a club such as them, the money that they won at the Club World Cup comes in really useful, because it would have been even more useful if they got an extra 30 mil from the final, because essentially they're at a point where they've probably got to renew Dembele and Barcola in the near future. They've both got 3 years left on their contract. There's interest in Barcola, and we know that. They've got to strike while the iron's hot without paying the same wages as they are before, because they've been very clear, and this has been one of the sticking points with Donnarumma's contract. It's like, okay, well, we paid Messi and Neymar this before, but we're not going back there. And a lot of their new deals are quite performance-based as well, which, is just the reality of A, PSG, and B, European football and the way the finances are at the moment. They've got to decide what they're doing with Gonzalo Ramos as well, because Doué has had such an unbelievable season. Even though they've only just signed him, they've presumably got to look at re-upping his contract as well. So this is why the Club World Cup money is so welcome, because you know what, there's not as much financial latitude for them as you'd possibly imagine, and they're going to have to box smart, and they're going to have to decide which one of those players Luis Enrique, or which number of those players Luis Enrique has said, like Zaire Emery's form has gone sideways. He's behind where he's gone backwards actually. He's behind where he was at this point last year. And, is he a player who you can play for like 20 games a season and he can slot in and do a good job? There has to be a question about that at the moment. And he needs to find the guys, as Lars says, who can do that.
Yeah, Lars, I'd be worried if I was a PSG fan, though. Listening to Andy there, you're saying that the entire central spine of our team needs strengthening. Goalkeeper...
No, it needs help. It needs help.
Okay, needs help. What's the difference there, out of interest?
Well, I don't want it to seem like they need a restructure. They don't need a restructure. What they need is relief, and they need rotation that's not going to weaken them. And I still think that's an issue.
The 11's good, but they could do with one extra option in each part of the field, right? Because we saw when you take Pacho out and put Beraldo in, it makes too big of a difference. If you take one of the three in the middle out and put someone else in, it makes too big of a difference. I think Andy is just secretly pining for Blaise Matuidi. He wants like peak era Blaise Matuidi in there. I mean, that would be the missing piece. We talk about, but we're going to get into in section 2, I think, the sort of interesting situation of the striker market in Europe, which seems a little stuck at the moment. There's a striker transfer merry-go-round that's not quite happening because people can't agree on various prices. I do wonder if these teams who are stuck on price for one of these players you hear about in the gossip columns every day, just put a sneaky bid in for Gonzalo Ramos. I think he's really good. I just don't think he really fits into what Luis Enrique wants to do. If Gonzalo Ramos goes to another big European club and plays every week, I think he's going to score a pile of goals next season.
And there's another thing, Andy, as well. As the more successful you are, the more the price goes up. I'm afraid, you want a centre forward as much as we're going to talk about that later on. You want a centre forward, you're going to have to pay a premium, even if it is only the centre forward as a support member of the team. It's still going to cost you, isn't it?
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
So, but the future next season, though, is there anything else that PSG need to consider going forwards? If they get the 4 players that they need to sign, that you're saying that would help the team, what else do they need to do? It's not a question of changing the way they play at all, is it? Because that still is something to behold, and also something to be able to restrain if you're the opposition.
There is one thing. We're not going to do like a review of the game because it was a while ago, but the way Chelsea got behind them in the fullback spaces, I thought was interesting. They were very specifically targeting Nuno Mendes. Interesting that Maresca earlier in the season had really been criticized by Chelsea fans and a lot of people for being too circumspect, playing too many passes. They actually decided the space here is behind the fullbacks. We're going to hit those areas pretty directly. that seemed to work worryingly well. I think that is something that, if I was Luis Enrique, I would want to watch that game again a few times and think, is that a weakness here that other people can exploit? Again, having as fast a center half as Pacho in there will help instead of having Beraldo. So maybe this will work itself out. Maybe signing one more fast center half to give yourself another out. But I did think there was a lot of space behind the fullbacks. I think Chelsea were very relentless in exploiting that, and I thought that worked to an extent that would worry me a little bit if I was Enrique.